Welcome to the channel. This channel is called Open Tab because I'm doing this simple. We're going to go through the tabs at the top of my screen about one issue, just one issue, and we're just going to close the tabs as we go. Now, before I begin, two things really quickly. I wanted to see where my political leanings are. I took a political compass test. I am a little bit left. I'm a little bit libertarian, but I am pretty close to the center. I wouldn't say I'm Gandhi, but I'm definitely not Hitler. That being said, when you are looking at your own media sources for information, you should always know where the biases are. I want you to know what my biases are. I'm very conservative in some regards. I'm liberal in others. However, I'm not making any money off of this, as of now at least. This is my first video. But you have to remember that every single time you watch mainstream media, they want you to keep watching them. So they are going to be very extreme in how they present their information because they need you to stick around to watch the commercials. They need you to stick around to see the advertisements because that is how they make money. That is how YouTube channels make money. Like and subscribe, right? Why? Because there's monetary gain, there's financial gain involved. So it's always good to know where biases are. A great website for this is All Sides. It gives you a very good example, a very good readout of where media sources lie on the spectrum of political beliefs, values, social issues, things like that. Okay? Now, the very first topic I want to discuss is last night's interview with Terry Crews. I almost said Tom Cruise. Terry Crews and Don Lemon on CNN. Now, Terry Crews, he's a cool guy. He's a very cool guy. He's received a lot of backlash about his views on the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, his view is that Black Lives Matter, and let me find a quote here. He said, Crews said, "A dangerous self-righteousness was developing in Black Lives Matter that viewed its followers as better. It's almost a supremacist move," he said, "as if their Black lives mattered a lot more than mine." Now, Don Lemon, he works for CNN. CNN is very left-leaning, although they will tell you that they're in the middle. They're just journalists. They're activists that are disguised as journalists. They want to pretend that they're very center and straightforward about their information, but they obviously have their narratives that they're pushing. So Don Lemon asked Terry Crews, "What does that have to do with equality, Terry?" Crews replied, "Black people need to hold black people accountable." Lemon reminded Crews that Black Lives Matter was not all-encompassing, meaning Black Lives Matter only focuses on one thing. Black Lives Matter is about police brutality and injustice, not about what's happening in black neighborhoods. Okay, now here's the question I have. Isn't that the problem? Isn't the problem that Black Lives Matter focuses solely on police brutality and injustice, but disregards what is going on in black communities around America? That is the problem. And Don Lemon just spilled the beans on it. I think he is so used to just bullcrapping the American public that occasionally a little bit of truth leaks out without him realizing it. Black Lives Matter is about police brutality and injustice. It's not about what is happening in black neighborhoods. If Black Lives Matter really cared about black communities, it would be all encompassing. They would want every member of every black community to feel safe, to be successful, to have justice, whether it's from police brutality or local thugs running the streets. Another thing that Terry Crews was receiving backlash over was that he called out the fact that people that are living in black communities are being held hostage by the criminals that live there. But nobody wants to listen to that. It is so much easier just to place blame outside of your situation than it is to accept responsibility. Now, when Don Lemon says it's not, Black Lives Matter is not about what's happening in black neighborhoods, tell that to the families of these people. This is a month old. This is from June 5th, 2020. And the list is much longer now. But what about these black lives? What about these people? Probably the most well-known among the people in this group was David Dorn. David Dorn was a retired police officer who was trying to protect his friend's pawn shop from looters and rioters and was shot and killed. But the media never talks about that. Why? Because it doesn't fit their narrative. These people were killed because of people protesting behind the shield of Black Lives Matter and social or systematic racism or injustice, using that as an excuse to go and riot and burn down and murder people in their own community. Now, what does Black Lives Matter actually believe? Because there's a difference between saying that Black Lives Matter, which they do. The lives of all people matter. Black lives do matter. White lives do matter. Brown lives do matter. But what does the actual movement, the group, Black Lives Matter, believe? So, let's find out. Black Lives Matter. This is from their website. Now we're going to go to the bottom of this first and work our way up. We embody and practice justice, liberation, and peace in our engagements with one another. Well, let's put that to the test. We embody and practice justice, liberation, and peace in our engagements with one another. Now, maybe they mean that they only practice peace with other people that are involved in the Black Lives Movement and not people outside of it. But here, this is from the New York Post. Black Lives Matter leader. If change doesn't happen, then we will burn down this system. So this is Hawk Newsome. Says the president of Greater New York Black Lives Matter said that if the movement fails to achieve meaningful change during nationwide protests over George Floyd's killing by Minneapolis police officers, it will burn down this system. If this country doesn't give us what we want, then we will burn down this system and replace it. All right? I could be speaking figuratively. I could be speaking literally. It's a matter of interpretation. So they practice peace. According to them, with one another. However, here's Minnesota. So when he said we will burn down this system figuratively or literally, I'm assuming he meant literally because there's Minnesota. Here's Los Angeles, where George Floyd was not killed, but yet somehow everybody across America has to use the name of George Floyd as a reason to just do whatever. Here is Portland. Portland is still going through this. Here is Atlanta. And we'll talk about Atlanta in a second. What is another thing that Black Lives Matter believes? Working our way up again. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another. It's kind of hard to care for one another when your cities are on fire and you guys were the ones that set them. It's kind of hard when you give social justice warriors like Antifa a reason to do those things too, because they think that they are furthering their own cause by furthering yours. But Black Lives Matter wants to disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure. Okay, well, what does that do? What does disrupting the prescribed nuclear family structure do? Well, according to Barack Obama in 2008, the absence of fathers is important, Obama continued, because children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of schools, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. That is not a police issue. That is a cultural issue. The beginning of this article, President Obama stated, more than half of all black children live in single-parent households, a number that has doubled since we were children. He went on to say that these absent fathers don't realize that responsibility does not end at conception and are acting like boys instead of men. Yet Black Lives Matter wants to get rid of the nuclear family. Children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of schools, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. Black Lives Matter also says that we make our spaces family friendly. Family friendly, I think, usually doesn't involve shootings and killing small children and burning your own communities and businesses to the ground. Family friendly, I think, means that you keep family units together, that you encourage that you allow families to live in situations where they don't have to live in fear and terror. But tell that to this family. Over the weekend, an 8-year-old girl in Atlanta was shot and killed near the Wendy's where Rayshard Brooks died last month, where he was shot and killed by police. Her mom and her were in their vehicle. They were pulling in to do a U-turn. There was a group of protesters, Black Lives Matter protesters, at the site of the Wendy's, which was burned down. She went to do a U-turn, and multiple people fired at her vehicle, which killed her daughter. Now, the mayor of Atlanta stated, "You can't blame this on a police officer. You can't say this is about criminal justice reform," Bottoms said. "This is about some people carrying some weapons who shot up a car with an 8-year-old baby in the car for what?" "Enough is enough," Bottoms continued. "If you want people to take us seriously and you don't want us to lose this movement, we can't lose each other." Okay, now what movement? You don't want us to lose this movement. What movement are we talking about? What movement are we talking about? Black Lives Matter. Yes, Black lives do matter. But this movement is being used as an excuse for things like this. Did those people just arbitrarily shoot at a vehicle? Did they think that the bullets wouldn't go through? Did they think... No, when you fire a gun at a person, It's to kill them. And what did this woman do other than pull into a Wendy's parking lot to do a U-turn? And then we have the statement from the father. He said, "They say Black Lives Matter," Williamson said. "You killed your own this time. You killed a child. She didn't do nothing to nobody." It's heartbreaking. Yet, where is Black Lives Matter on this? They haven't issued a statement. There are no protests. There are no marches. There's no memorials being held for her. I think George Floyd got 4 or 5 funerals attended by celebrities and politicians. What did this little girl do? Other than sit in her car with her mom. But yet there's no statement from Black Lives Matter on this. Speaking of Atlanta, where that shooting happened, over the 4th of July weekend, 5 dead, more than 2 dozen injured in Atlanta holiday weekend shootings. In the Bronx, this was on July 5th. Dad gunned down in the Bronx while holding 6-year-old daughter's hand. A dad, hand in hand with his 6-year-old daughter, looked to his left at a Bronx street Sunday and crossed the intersection when a car paused to let them go. But when the driver pulled up and opened fire, striking the man repeatedly. I'm not going to show you the video, but it's so sad. The little girl goes off running by herself when her father collapses to the ground after being shot. Where's Black Lives Matter on this? Saying, yes, we can deal with police brutality, but in the meantime, we need to stop killing each other. And then there's this. In Seattle. Chaz or CHOP or whatever you want to call it, that was organized. It was a 6-block zone in Seattle's Capitol Hill district. Okay, we're not talking about the entire city. We're talking about a 6-block area of Seattle. 6 people were shot in 10 days. They became worse than what they were trying to replace, which is the police. Baltimore, over this weekend. 12 people shot, 1 fatally. New York. Yet another gun violence death in New York as surge persists. The recent spike in gun violence in New York City shows no sign of ending, with yet another fatal shooting Tuesday morning. Police say that since Friday, at least 12 people were killed in roughly 50 shootings across all 5 boroughs. 50 shootings. But then we go to Chicago. 87 shot, 17 fatally in Chicago July 4th weekend, police say. Okay, now here's just Chicago. Just Chicago. 87 people shot, 17 fatally. Now, I'm going to move this tab. The next tab, this is from Larry Elder. He posted this in June. Last year, there were 9 unarmed black people killed by law enforcement. 19 unarmed white people. Okay. How many were killed in Chicago just this weekend? 17. You're going to tell me that 9 people being killed over the entire nation in a year is the problem? When you have 17 in just Chicago? We didn't count New York. We didn't count Baltimore. We didn't count Atlanta. We didn't count Seattle. We didn't count any other cities. In Chicago alone, in one weekend, 17. Yet it's police brutality that's the problem. Now, Larry Elder, who I really Love tweeted this out. How many unarmed blacks were killed by cops last year? 9. How many unarmed whites were killed by cops last year? 19. More officers are killed every year than are unarmed blacks. When do the Blue Lives Matter protests begin? Now, obviously, PolitiFact they're going to fact check this, and they're going to put their own little twist on it to make it sound as though it's not as bad as what he is saying, that the numbers are actually worse. It says, we found that Elder was speaking broadly about police killings, but pulling his numbers from the Washington Post's more narrow tally of fatal shootings by police officers in the line of duty. The Washington Post tally doesn't account for off-duty police. Okay, let me pause there. Off-duty police? What if this post was about how many unarmed people were killed by off-duty drive-through managers? How many people were killed by off-duty, I don't know, garbage truck drivers? We're talking about police officers acting as police officers. Most people don't go to work. I mean, some people do. Some people go to work and kill people, but most people, they wait until it's their free time to murder people. So I really think that is a very stupid point to make. The Washington Post tally doesn't account for off-duty police or the use. So, yeah, most people don't go to work just to kill people. Or the use by on-duty officers of other force that can be lethal, such as tasers or physical restraint. Now, I find this statement about tasers funny because they say that tasers can be lethal, but Rayshard Brooks, the guy who was killed at the Wendy's, where that little girl in Atlanta was shot and killed this weekend, the district attorney in Atlanta said that Rayshard Brooks didn't pose a threat to the officers, even though he shot a taser at them, which, according to PolitiFact, tasers can be lethal. So there's that too. But I digress. Now, what is one of the top causes of death among black U.S. residents? Now, this is from 2017. However, so if you look at the top, diseases of the heart, malignant neoplasms, so cancers, those, like it says, mentions down here, the leading causes of death for African Americans generally reflect the leading causes of death for the entire United States population. So these top two, especially, generally reflect what other Americans of other backgrounds die of. But then we get to the homicide among African Americans. The homicide rate among African Americans has been higher than that of other races and ethnicities for many years. In 2016, there were 38 homicide deaths per 100,000 population among male African Americans, and only 5 such deaths per 100,000 population for white males. 38 to 5. 7 to 8 times the number. So, coming back to Don Lemon, he states that Black Lives Matter is about police brutality and injustice, not about what is happening in black neighborhoods. But I ask again, and just to finish this out, isn't that the problem? Isn't it the problem that we are putting all of the blame on police and none of the blame on the people actually committing the crimes day after day after day? And yet, for some reason, we want to defund the police. We want to spend that money on social workers to go in and stop a shooting somehow or prevent crime. I don't know. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, like and subscribe. And with that, this tab is closed.